In 1498, the Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama reached the southwestern coast of India after nearly a year at sea. He arrived having lost a third of his crew to scurvy and storms, all to secure 3 dried plants: pepper, cinnamon, and cloves. By 1502, da Gama returned with 20 warships. He intercepted a merchant vessel carrying 400 Muslim traders and pilgrims, locked the passengers below deck, and burned the entire ship alive in a harbor. His objective remained the same: the monopoly of the spice trade. In the ancient world, these aromatics functioned as medicine, high-status currency, and sacred materials. They were the physical evidence of wealth, far removed from the common grocery items today. Around 1500 BCE, Egyptian priests packed cinnamon into body cavities during the mummification process, believing it helped preserve the dead for the afterlife. This created a massive economic demand for a plant that only grew in Sri Lanka and southern India, thousands of miles across open water and desert. This vast geographic gap between the source and the consumer created one of the most lucrative supply chains in history. Because the spices changed hands dozens of times across the Indian Ocean and the Arabian Peninsula, the final price in the Mediterranean reached levels comparable to gold. Arab merchants maintained a strict monopoly for over a millennium by guarding the source of their cargo. They kept the seasonal monsoon wind patterns a closely guarded secret, ensuring European sailors remained stranded on the African coast, unable to cross the Indian Ocean. To deter competitors, traders invented myths. They told the Greek historian Herodotus that cinnamon was harvested from the nests of giant birds built on sheer cliff faces, reachable only by tricking the birds with large pieces of meat. The economic drain on Europe was staggering. Pliny the Elder complained that Rome shipped 50 million sesterces to India annually just for pepper. Centuries later, in 410 AD, the Visigoth king Alaric accepted 3,000 pounds of black pepper as a primary ransom for the city of Rome, valuing it for its portability and trade power. By the 1400s, Venice had become the wealthiest city on earth by securing exclusive deals with these Arab suppliers. The gold mosaics of St. Mark's and the fleets dominating the Mediterranean were the direct result of Venetian control over the final leg of the spice route. This system was disrupted in 1453 when the Ottoman Empire conquered Constantinople. The Ottomans seized the overland routes, heavily taxing the flow of goods and doubling the price of cloves and cinnamon for European consumers. Facing these soaring costs and shut out of the Mediterranean networks, the kingdoms of the Atlantic coast began looking for a way to bypass every middleman between Lisbon and the pepper plantations of India. Portugal spent decades financing expeditions further south along the African coastline. In 1488, Bartholomew Dias rounded the Cape of Good Hope, proving that a direct sea route to the Indian Ocean was geographically possible. In 1492, Christopher Columbus attempted to find a western shortcut for Spain. He reached the Caribbean carrying letters to the Great Khan and a translator for Arabic, fully expecting to negotiate spice deals. He died still believing he had found the outer islands of Asia, despite finding no cinnamon or cloves. To prevent war, the Pope brokered the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494. As this map line shows, the world was split. Portugal claimed the east, Spain the west. This granted Portugal the Indian Ocean and Spain the Americas to control the spice supply. When da Gama finally reached India, his trade goods, cheap cloth and trinkets, were rejected by merchants who dealt in silk and gemstones. Portugal lacked the commercial appeal to compete in the existing Indian Ocean trade, which had operated peacefully between Arab, Indian, and Chinese merchants for centuries. Instead of offering better goods, Portugal moved to dismantle the existing system. They began using naval firepower to seize strategic ports and forcibly reroute the world's wealth. The Portuguese shattered the Indian Ocean trade network by capturing major hubs like Goa and Malacca. They demanded that every merchant vessel purchase a trading pass or face seizure and sinking by their warships. However, Portugal was too small to sustain a global maritime empire. By the late 1500s, their fortified trading posts were decaying, leaving an opening for a new private entity, the Dutch East India Company, or VOC. Chartering in 1602, the VOC became the world's first publicly traded megacorporation. It operated with the powers of a sovereign state, raising its own armies, minting its own currency, and waging its own private wars. While Portugal tried to control the sea lanes, the Dutch targeted the source. They focused on the Banda Islands, the only place on Earth where nutmeg trees then grew naturally. In 1621, the VOC launched an assault on the islands. When the indigenous population refused to grant an exclusive monopoly, the Dutch executed or enslaved roughly 13,000 people, virtually the entire population, and repopulated the islands with company-controlled slave labor. To maintain high prices in Europe, the VOC burned surplus cloves and nutmeg in massive bonfires. They preferred to destroy the fruits of their labor, rather than allow the supply to exceed demand and lower their profit margins. In 1667, the Dutch signed the Treaty of Breda, trading their claim to Manhattan to the British. At the time, Manhattan was a developing outpost. The Dutch considered the trade a victory because it secured their control over a single nutmeg-producing island in the Banda archipelago. Shut out of the clove and nutmeg trade, the British East India Company pivoted its private army of 250,000 soldiers toward India, eventually establishing itself as the de facto ruler of the subcontinent to control pepper and cinnamon. The pursuit of spices had moved from ancient trade routes to a global system of corporate monopolies enforced by systematic violence and the colonization of entire nations. The VOC's total control was eventually broken by botanical espionage. French and British agents successfully smuggled seedlings out of Dutch territory, transplanting cloves and nutmeg to their own colonies in Zanzibar, Grenada, and Mauritius. Once these plants could be grown in dozens of tropical regions, the geographic monopolies collapsed. By the late 19th century, faster steamships and the opening of the Suez Canal turned these rare treasures into cheap, mass-market commodities. The VOC went bankrupt in 1799, and the British East India Company was dissolved in 1874. Both entities collapsed once the commodities they killed for became ordinary grocery items sold for pocket change. The remnants of these trade routes remain in the global kitchen. Indonesian nutmeg grows in the Caribbean, and Indian pepper cultivation has spread to Brazil, permanently altering the flavors and recipes of nearly every culture on Earth. The architecture of modern finance grew out of the spice trade. The joint stock company, the first stock exchange in Amsterdam, and the concept of shareholder capitalism were all developed to manage the immense risks and rewards of these long-distance voyages. These companies also established a specific template for colonial economies. The systems of land seizure, monoculture crops, and enslaved labor first refined in the nutmeg groves of the Banda Islands were later applied to the sugar plantations of the Caribbean and the cotton fields of the Americas. Modern financial systems, global shipping lanes, and centuries of colonial borders are the survivors of this era. They remain the legacy of a simple human desire to make food taste like something more.